Yes, hello everyone. My name is Francesco Fuso Nerini. I'm Associate Professor on Energy Systems for Sustainable Development at KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden, where I'm also the director to the KTH Climate Action Center, which is a center that works across schools and departments at KTH for collaborative research and partnerships on climate adaptation and mitigation. And today I would like to speak about some of our work looking at how climate change relates and interconnects to the achievement of all sustainable development goals. And let's say in the second part, also looking at how artificial intelligence developments are related to issues related to sustainability and climate change again. But the entry point for this work is that since their creation back in 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals have been used in practice to shape and understand research, policy, and projects. And of course, not only the broad headline of the goals, but all their targets and indicators. And to provide the first example and some more details of how that has been done, I will present a first study that we published in 2018-2019, looking at how climate interrelates with the achievement of all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. If you're interested in reading more, these are the two key studies that relate to that topic. And I mostly show this slide to show the breadth of expertise that there is in the authoring team for these studies. So you see 10 people supported doing this, and this a very transdisciplinary team of researchers, including people working on natural and social sciences, going from engineering to law to gender equality and energy systems and so on. And that very broad, set of skills is kind of needed when you need to look at a topic across the sustainability aspects that are defined by the Sustainable Development Goals. And in this study, basically, for each of the 169 targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, we look at answering two questions. So first of all, if that specific target can be affected by climate change. And second, if we look at climate action, so action to address climate change, if there are synergies and trade-offs between those actions and the achievement of the 169 targets. In practice, if you go to the supplementary material of this study, you will find quite a long table where basically we published the finding of, let's say, these 169 small studies, in which one for each one of the targets. So for instance, here you can see target 1.1, which is the first target of goal one of on ending poverty, which is, for instance, by 2030, eradicate extreme poverty, and so on in the description. First of all, how can it be affected by climate change? And second of all, looking at the climate action, so the actions across climate adaptation and mitigation that one must take to address climate change have either synergies or trade-offs with achievement of the target. The starting point, of course, here is the definition of climate action. So to understand how climate action relates with the SDGs. And if you look at the targets, you will see how we define climate action. And also we complement that definition with the Paris Agreement. So basically, this broad definition takes into account climate action as the set of climate adaptation and climate mitigation measures that are needed to address climate change. If you're not familiar with the two names, climate adaptation means climate change is happening. How do we adapt to it as a society? While climate mitigation encompasses the range of interventions we need to limit global climate change. So from changes in the energy systems, in the food systems, and so on. This is a graphic explanation of the results for the first part of the study. So showing how climate change impacts the SDGs. In this figure, you can see each one of the each one of the goals. So you see 1, 2, 3, and so on. On the right side of each one of the goals, we represent as a small box each one of the targets. So goal 1 is target 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and A and B. So it's 7 targets. And when the target is highlighted in red, it means that we found evidence, so published studies, that showed that the achievement of that goal can be impacted by climate change. I'll provide a couple of examples of how that is, just to provide kind of a broad level overview of the pervasive impacts that climate change can have on our societies. And first of all, we can see that climate change can impact nearly all the Sustainable Development Goals. First of all, we can have impact on social justice. Unfortunately, as in every crisis, the poorest are the most vulnerable. And this can result in increased inequalities, both within and among countries. And ultimately, we see increased evidence that how climate change can result in climate-driven conflicts. Climate change is related to health issues. So the spreading of diseases, for instance, that were not available in certain geographical areas, is related to climate-induced extreme events and disasters, such as floods, such as wildfires, and so on. And ultimately, it was also related to malnutrition and to the functioning of food systems. And then, of course, climate change and ecosystem loss and issues, let's say, in forests and marine ecosystems go hand in hand. So climate change can affect the sea temperature change and acidification. It can speed up the deglaciation of ecosystems, mountain ecosystems, speed up desertification, and invasive species. So species that are either vegetable or animal that shouldn't be in a location but are there due to climate change. These are the results instead of the second part of the study. As I mentioned before, we looked at how climate action, so all the actions that are needed within climate adaptation and mitigation, affect each one of the 169 targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. In this representation, a bit different from before, still we have the boxes on the right of each Sustainable Development Goal representing the targets. However, in the half on top, we represent where we found synergies between achieving that target and the climate goals, and on the bottom half, possible trade-offs. So synergies in green, possible trade-offs in this orange-red. I'll not go into the detail about the legend below, which also talks about the strength of this synergy or trade-off. But first of all, if you look at these, you can see that achieving the climate goals has many more synergies across all Sustainable Development Goals than trade-offs. I think there are over 80% of the targets have synergies with achieving the climate goals. However, of course, this is very dependent on where you are. And some of the trade-offs, of course, need to be taken extremely seriously. So, for instance, if you're in a country where half of your economy depends on fossil fuels, achieving the climate goals will have more impacts than another country. And so, again, addressing these trade-offs is really, really crucial to advance action against climate change. Providing, again, some examples, we look at how climate action can enable and reinforce building prosperous, equal, and peaceful societies. So in all this representation, I just highlight some of the targets that are impacted. And it has many co-benefits, for instance, on health, by helping in parallel to reduce pollution that harms millions of people every year, energy and water systems, and efficiency across society. And also, similarly to what I said before, achieving the climate goals is necessary for the environmental targets to be met. Here, there is a strong synergy between biodiversity goals and climate goals. But again, if the narrative or if this research would stop here, where we see that climate change has all these very bad impacts on achieving all these sustainability goals, and climate action has all these synergies, of course, there will be nothing stopping us for moving very fast on addressing climate change. But unfortunately, as it often is, it's more complicated than that. And depending where you are, which population group you are, and so on, there are some important trade-offs that need to be addressed. First, of course, is the economic one. So there is plenty of studies showing that the global economic benefits of addressing climate change are much larger than the costs. But still there are costs, especially in the short term, to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy and other things across all the scale, and someone will need to pay for that. And then again, depending where you are in the world, if you're in a fuel-dependent economy, this will have more impact on your budgets. And some of these trade-offs are also not that obvious. So I just put here an example that some maybe not well-designed agricultural policies could impact equality issues and food production. So there have been cases in which certain greenhouse gas emission reduction policies in agriculture could be addressed by large agriculture producers, but it was difficult for smallholders or family agriculture to change their practice to include those. So again, it all depends on how these climate policies are defined, but again, it's very important to understand and address all these possible trade-offs so that progress towards addressing climate change is not halted. So there was a brief introduction on this study looking at climate and sustainable development goals. And now I would like to jump into some of the dynamics that we saw when putting together this knowledge on climate change, also with the recent developments on artificial intelligence. And I based this second part of this seminar on this publication that we have published in back in 2020, I think, which is the role of artificial intelligence in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. You can see actually some metrics, but these are a bit outdated. I think by now it has been downloaded 250,000 times, and has really helped shaping the field of sustainable artificial intelligence. And also in this case, I showed this authoring team to show again a very transdisciplinary group of authors going from AI experts to sustainability experts to really try to assess and understand these dynamics. And the framing of the study is very similar to the climate one. So we conducted 169, let's say, micro studies for each one of these SDG targets and try to understand if artificial intelligence could enable or inhibit the achievement of that target. And as I mentioned, putting together a very cross or transdisciplinary team going from AI ethics to sustainability to many other fields to try to address this complicated research question. And of course, when one talks about AI, there are many definitions, and the term has been used a lot, so there might be a bit of confusion. So the real first step of this study was to define what artificial intelligence is. And in this case, we take quite a broad definition, defining AI such as software technology with some of these capabilities, such as the capability of perception, such as face recognition, decision-making, such as medical diagnosis, prediction, weather forecast, automatic knowledge extraction and pattern recognition from data. This also includes, discovery of fake news, but more broadly, natural language processing, which you might have heard by now, for instance, with ChatGPT and so on. Interactive communication, again, including things like ChatGPT, and logical reasoning. So very broad definition, encompassing also the field of machine learning, looking at this wide array of software technology that is emerging and has been emerging in the past few years. And as for the previous study, again, if you look at the supplementary material of this publication, you will find this big table looking at the details for each one of the targets. But then, of course, you also can read the paper and look at a summary of all these dynamics together that were divided into society, economy, and environment. In the study, we see again that, or we find that AI, there is more evidence of AI impacting positively the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals rather than negatively. But of course, there are some limitations. So, for instance, we saw that in literature, there is much more information on the positive impact of the AI, while much less on the negative impacts of AI, meaning that there is a bit of a bias in publishing positive rather than negative results. And again, it really depends how you look at these. Some of these trade-offs are really important to be considered. Here's a representation of our finding across each one of the targets, but maybe the best is that I go directly into a bit more detail of some of the dynamics that we found. So in this representation, very similar to the previous study, you see each one of the SDGs, and at the right of the SDGs, in green, the synergies that we found between artificial intelligence and achieving the target, and in orange, red, the possible trade-offs. And we see on the positive side that AI can speed up our economy and industry, and in some cases help addressing poverty. So as with the previous technology revolution, there will be new jobs, it can increase productivity, or there's even some interesting new applications, such as, for instance, satellite data that is used to create maps of areas where there is poverty, to then use algorithms to try to have a better understanding of which policy interventions could be made to track and address poverty. But still, the big thing here is possible inequality. So as you can already imagine, and of course we are hearing this more and more with this, especially lately with these new natural language processing technologies, certain jobs will be lost. And also we talk about uneven opportunities. So if you are in a poorer country with less computer availability, or even in a poorer segment and you don't have the possibility to become fluent with this AI technology, this AI technology might end up increasing inequalities, giving a lot of benefits to a certain part of the population while leaving behind another part of the population. And something that also we have seen is that how these algorithms, for instance, in social media, might end up polarizing societies and increasing discrimination in case they're used to cluster people based on their beliefs. And then, of course, polarized and unequal societies can have impacts on peace and stability. When we zoom in, let's say, more on the energy and climate part of this study, we see how, in certain cases, AI can potentially enable smart and low-carbon societies. So one example, and I'll say a couple of words more about this, it can help integrating variable renewables by enabling smart grids. It can support the creation of smart and low-pollution cities. And also, in some AI applications, it can support the management of natural resources and resource efficiency. However, at the same time, these models use a lot of energy. There are really a lot of estimates. That's also something we're trying to study at KTH with some of our researchers, of how much AI or broader information communication technology could take up the global electricity demand. And I'll talk a bit more about this in a focus looking at AI for low-carbon society. So, first of all, when we look at how AI relates to affordable and clean energy, so goal SDG 7, and here on the right you see the same representation as before with the SDGs and the synergies and trade-offs. As I mentioned, AI can help to integrate variable renewables by enabling smart grids that partially match electrical demands to times when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. But also, a range of algorithms can be used to improve energy efficiency. So an example is thinking of your homes as a range of interconnected appliances that work connected to some AI algorithm. For instance, a classical example is smart charging of electric cars when electricity demand is lower, or, I don't know, models that make your dishwasher start when electricity is cheapest, and again, electricity demand is not so high, helping, of course, the overall system. And then, of course, one home doesn't make that all of the difference, but if you consider all of the homes in a country connected in this way, you could really change the way in which the electricity system works in a country. At the same time, we always look at these synergies and trade-offs. So when we look at AI and affordable and clean energy, we can look at energy demand, as I mentioned before. Again, these models that are trained for hours on computers and supercomputers used a lot of electricity, which of course can have impact at the level of global electricity demand. And also, a very important aspect is cybersecurity. So if we look at our energy systems, but any infrastructure, if all of it is managed by algorithms that are potentially connected to internet, it opens the way to cyber attacks. When we look at the interconnections between the AI goals and the goals on climate action, there's also here some interesting dynamics. So for instance, AI is being used to better understand climate change. So our atmosphere and the understanding of climate change is a very complex science. But some of these models and algorithms can help us understanding how the climate works to the level of supporting the prediction and forecasting of extreme weather events, or that is very crucial when, I don't know, there is a storm coming, or even understanding our food system, so predicting, a very dry year to help agricultural response, and all of that benefiting planning for climate adaptation. So how do we adapt to advancing climate change? And as I said before, this is also connected on climate mitigation. So how we integrate low carbon energy systems in a more complex electrical system. And the perfect example of the possible trade-offs on energy systems is cryptocurrency. So something that has been created, let's say, in this parallel AI world or ICT world is blockchain, cryptocurrency, or something like bitcoins that are globally using as much as electricity as some nations' electrical demand. And of course, that comes with in many places, with more fossil fuels burning, with more emissions, and so is counteracting action to address climate change. And another good example is when we look at our cities. Cities are always quite example to study because there are places where people, social, technical systems come together with a lot of different interactions. And so in a city, for instance, AI technology can have positive impacts by interconnecting technologies such as electrical autonomous vehicles, smart appliances, automatic infrastructure, such as water delivery and air quality checks, and also air quality forecasts. But again, if we look at the city level, there are implications on cybersecurity and again, increased energy demands. And a bit of conclusions on these broad AI studies that we did. And again, now we don't have too much time to talk about all of these, but you're very welcome to go and read both the climate change study and the AI study that I mentioned in this seminar. Well, first of all, AI is already affecting everyone's lives, as you see more and more, both positively and negatively. Positively, for instance, looking at smart grids and improvements in cities, new platform for health, and so on. But also negatively. So we see cases in which technology has been used to polarizing society. There is even a new term that is called big nudging, where big data and AI are being used to steer part of the population, maybe to change the result of an election or things like that. And that, as we see more and more nowadays, will only increase. Potentially, on one hand, enabling an AI-fueled sustainable development, but only if we can address certain trade-offs. And something that you see discussed more and more is that we see that technology and AI is evolving very fast, and sometimes faster than how citizens and governments can understand and respond to it. And in this study, we see how there are still large research gaps to manage this transition. And an example is how we use AI ethically. There is research on that, but there's much more to be done. And also we see how our infrastructure could be vulnerable to all these changes. And so again, the promise of AI of improving sustainable development can only be achieved if there is this substantial work in overcoming gaps in transparency, safety, and ethical standards, and more broadly on how we use this technology in the society. So that is all for me today. And more broadly, if you're interested, I will welcome you to look a bit more into the references and not only to the work that we do, but this work in trying to understand how climate, AI, energy systems, and so on interrelate with the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.